Welcome to Stuff They Didn't Teach Me in Sunday School. Today, I want you to put away the Christmas cards. I want you to put away the way that you've heard this Christmas story in songs and literature and TV specials and children's Christmas plays, and I want you to look at the text. I want you to look at Matthew's account of the birth of Christ in those early years of his life with fresh eyes, because I think you're going to see some things that maybe you've missed before. The first thing you're going to see in Matthew's account, Matthew chapter 2, is there is no mention of Nazareth. There's no mention of a trip from Nazareth to Bethlehem. The assumption in Matthew's gospel seems to be that all this takes place in Bethlehem. There is no mention of Nazareth whatsoever until the very end of chapter 2. We're told in verse 1, when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem. Who are these guys? I love that line, the line from Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. You know, when the posse keeps chasing them and catching up with them all the time, and Butch looks at Sundance and he says, who are those guys? I always think about that when I see the wise men, the story of the wise men. Who are these guys? Where'd they show up from? Where'd they come from? What's this all about? We don't really know. Best guesses are that they're probably from the area of ancient Babylon, that they probably have some familiarity with Hebrew scriptures because the Hebrews were captive in Babylon. Israelites were captive in Babylon for 50 to 70 years, and they would have had some familiarity with those Hebrew scriptures. They are probably on a king's payroll to think up wise things. Good work if you can get it. Many kings had a group of wise men, scholars, that would think up wise things, make observations on nature, on the sky, on the weather, on all kinds of things, and write them down. That's probably partly who these guys are. They obviously are observing the sky because they see something different. They see something different in the sky that causes them to go to Jerusalem and look for a king. There are all kinds of theories on what that star was. I'm not going to go into that on stuff they didn't teach me in Sunday school. You can read that at other places. But some kind of phenomenon in the sky that caused them to come to Jerusalem and look for a king. If you're going to go look for a king of the Jews, you're going to go to the palace in Jerusalem, and that's where they go. Herod doesn't know anything about this. Remember, Herod's a nutcase. This is going to bother Herod a great deal. Even though he's toward the end of his life, he's already killed 2 of his sons and his wife for treason, drowned the high priest because he's irritated with him, and now these guys show up on his doorstep and say, hey, we heard there's a new king. Where is he? And Herod plays it cool. He says, I don't know, but let's figure this out. So he gets his own chief priests and scribes. He gets the guys that ought to know this stuff, and they go look it up. And what they find is a line from Micah chapter 5, verse 2, but you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who will govern or shepherd my people Israel. And Herod sends him off to Bethlehem. And good old paranoid, fearful Herod says, hey guys, when you get down there, I want you to come back here afterwards. Tell me where he is. I want to go worship this new king too. Yeah, right. They go down and they worship the Christ child. And the line in chapter 2, verse 11, and going into the house, not the stable, the house. Forget the situation in most children's Christmas services where the shepherds kind of are going out and the wise men coming in going, high-fiving each other. Hi, guys, there he is right behind me there. Probably different times, different circumstances. Also, I want you to notice when we get to Luke that there is no mention of a stable in Luke either. There's no mention in the Bible of Jesus being born in a stable, yet if you ask 100 people, where was Jesus born? 99 of them are going to tell you in a stable, and the other one's going to say, huh? But there's no mention of a stable. What it does say in Luke is that he was laid in a manger. Now, sometimes mangers were outside in open fields. Sometimes mangers were in caves, which most often served as stables. And indeed, the earliest traditions about Jesus' birthplace was a cave, not a wooden stable. There's another possibility, and this possibility is all wrapped up in Matthew's account. It's all wrapped up in the idea that Matthew doesn't mention anything about Nazareth, that Matthew almost assumes, or seems to assume, that Joseph lives in Bethlehem. Now, we know from Luke's account that they were in Nazareth at the time of the betrothal, and now when the taxation takes place, Joseph has to go back to Bethlehem because that's where he's from, or that's where his family is from. I would suggest to you that that's probably where Joseph is from. And that Joseph probably has a house there, or a family house there, and that where Mary and Joseph end up is not in a wooden stable, and maybe not even in a cave, but in a house. Some ancient Israelite homes were built with a second level up here for living. In the back of that level would be mangers right in the floor, and then a lower level where the animals could come into that home. The animals would then provide some of the warmth for that home. They would eat out of the manger that was right in the floor there of the home and be a part of the back part of that house. What Luke tells us is that there was no room for them in the inn, which could also be translated guest house, which could also be translated guest room. So when Joseph comes back, possibly to his own family home, somebody else is occupying the guest room. And so Joseph and Mary go out to the back of the house, not down in the stable part itself, but right next to that, and the convenient place for laying this baby when he's born is in that manger. Very possible that Joseph owned property down there. It would also explain why he had to be there to be taxed. But Matthew doesn't do anything with that taxation. Matthew doesn't do anything with Nazareth. Matthew doesn't do anything with the travel. Matthew assumes a story that begins in Bethlehem. And he assumes a house, not a stable. After the wise men have worshiped Jesus, an angel appears to Joseph in a dream and says, "You got to get out of here. Take this child and go to Egypt, because Herod is about to destroy him." They get out in the nick of time. Herod comes in, and his men kill all the babies in Bethlehem, all the male babies that are under 2 years old, after he determined when that star appeared. It appears that maybe Jesus and the family lived in Bethlehem, maybe up to 2 years in that house, before they took off for Egypt. This was to fulfill, Matthew says, what the Lord had spoken by the prophet, "Out of Egypt have I called my son." If you go back and look at that one in Hosea 11:1, that's where that passage is. It doesn't look like it's looking forward at all. It looks like it's looking backwards. God called old Israel out of Egypt to the promised land. Now God would call new Israel out of Egypt back to his land. Herod is furious. When the wise men don't show up, and he goes in and kills the babies. Art has depicted just this mass slaughter of babies, various artists over the years. Bethlehem's not a big town, maybe 300 people at that time. Today it's a big town, 50,000 people or more. But at that time it was a very small town, maybe 300 people. If you do the math, there might have been 10, 12 male babies killed at that time. Now that's a tragedy for the 10 or 12 families that those babies would have come from. But in light of Herod's other atrocities, I mean, he drowned the high priest, for crying out loud. He killed his 2 sons. He killed his favorite wife. What's 12 babies in Bethlehem, more or less? It doesn't make the history books. And sometimes people have been critical of that fact, said, see, it didn't happen. It doesn't make any of the history books. I would maintain Herod is so bloody that the death of 12 kids in a little dusty town of Bethlehem is not really historically significant outside of the biblical context. Wasn't significant to the historians of that day. When Herod died, an angel appears to Joseph in a dream and says, "Take the child and his mother and go to the land of Israel, for those who sought the child's life are dead." And it doesn't appear, it's definite what Joseph is going to do, move back to Bethlehem. That's home, I would suggest. That's where he's going to go. But when he gets back, he realizes that Archelaus, who is Herod's son, is reigning over Judea, and he says, you know, the nut doesn't fall far from the tree here, and this could be a real problem going back to Archelaus's area. So that's how he ends up in Nazareth, going back to probably what was Mary's hometown in Nazareth to raise this child. And then the last verse, he went and dwelt in a city called Nazareth, that what was spoken by the prophets might be fulfilled. He shall be called a Nazarene. I should give you an assignment between this week's and next week's to go back in the Old Testament and find me a passage that says that the Messiah would be called a Nazarene. That would be an exercise in futility. It's not there. I think what you have to look at is the Hebrew. Probably we should translate that. He shall be called a Netzer. A branch in Hebrew means branch or shoot. And there are all kinds of passages in the Old Testament to talk about a shoot coming out of the stump of Jesse or a branch out of Jesse's line. So Jesus goes back to the town of Branch because he was called a branch out of the Old Testament. God intervenes in many ways in that Matthew's account of the Christmas story to make sure that his son is born, to make sure that his son fulfills the Old Testament prophecies, and to make sure that his son is protected in time of crisis. And Jesus lives.